And welcome to another episode of Doubl3Tap. Today we are joined by Abhi, the founder and CEO of AP Collective, a go-to-market firm focused on Web3 projects. Great to have you on the show, Abhi.
GM, thank you for inviting onto the podcast.
What games are you currently playing?
Traveling a lot at the moment, which is not super fun when it comes to playing Web3 games, as it means I don't have too much time except on the plane. But at the moment, I was recently playing a bit of Riftstorm and Off the Grid when I've had some time on PC, specifically on like the Web3 side of things. As when I've been traveling, have been lucky enough to have access to Steam and a console recently, so that was a lot of fun. On mobile, I've been playing a bit of King of Destiny. Fableborn just announced a new season and have been able to kind of get early access to that by having a good relationship with them, which has been a lot of fun on that side of things. But since I've been traveling a little bit more, I've been playing more traditional games. I've been very focused and locked in on Monopoly. I feel like Monopoly is one of those games which would be a great ticker as well if anyone kind of wanted to put two and two together. Monopoly Go is one of my favorite ways to pass the time, and then also been playing a bit of FIFA, as that's a game which I've kind of been immersed in both as an individual and on like a professional level since 2015, and just been playing just a little bit here and there, not being too tuned in to everything related to football too much with being so busy, but that's kind of what I've been up to at the moment. And yeah, so just kind of balancing between a bit of mobile gaming, a bit of console gaming, and just a bit of some traditional, more classics as well.
I forget. I know I asked you this question before, but you are more of like a OG FIFA fan. Are you also playing Ultimate Team?
Yeah, I was pretty good at Ultimate Team. To be honest, I've been playing that since like 2014, 2015. There was like a version of FIFA Ultimate Team that came out on mobile that would lasted like a couple of years. I don't know if you're familiar, but I think it was like FIFA 15, and it was kind of like the last generation of mobile, and started to collect like these really rare cards that were out for like only a couple of days, and they got to the point where like they were unattainable, and then you had to buy it via third parties on PayPal just to get access to these like really rare like bronze and silver like rare cards because they were only out for a couple of days 2 years ago because it was like an extended season. So yeah, a bit of a nerd when it comes to this side of things. Pretty competitive as well, but I wouldn't say I'm any good, but I would say I'm competitive.
Yeah, I've always found the FIFA Ultimate Team like collector mechanics just insane, and how people just spend year after year. They're obviously doing something right.
I feel like
Right.
trading FIFA Ultimate Team cards is a great like 101 course for trading NFTs. So many like arbitrage opportunities in FIFA Ultimate Team back in the day that basically got recycled in the last cycle, in my opinion, with NFTs. But yeah, lots of great games out. A lot of games are coming to market on the Web3 side. One of the things that we feel AP Collective and you do very strongly, Abhi, is working with great founders and exposing these great founders to the market. So maybe if we could just tee it off here, like when you're looking at working with different clients, different partners, like what are some of the kind of top of mind characteristics of what makes a great marketable founder, specifically in Web3? And maybe just given that you've worked with a lot of different companies, I'm sure this kind of spans an interesting spectrum. So I'd love to hear kind of your quick take on that.
To me, the most important thing when it comes to working with a brand in Web3 is the founder, as we like to engage with teams for an extended period of time, anywhere from 3 months to a year or beyond, which in Web3 is a long period of time, in my opinion. And for me, a great founder determines the success of the brand because they have to be able to understand that the narrative or the techniques or the go-to-market strategy that worked a couple weeks ago or a couple months ago may not work today. And even if they're halfway built, they're building a product or looking to set up a campaign designed for a certain initiative, or they want to capture a certain narrative or attention, it can disappear in seconds. And I think having an open-minded founder that's receptive to new ideas, willing to take on and adapt depending on how the landscape evolves is super critical in my opinion. And that's, to me, is like probably the most important thing in general when it comes to the founders. Like, how open-minded are they to really understand criticism, even if they spent 2 weeks, a month, over a month to kind of design this campaign and execute on it, are they willing to tweak what's needed because of market feedback and just general sentiment? Or are they too, I think listening skills for a founder is incredibly important, because there's a lot of times where I'd say advisors, consultants, marketers, team members, community members raise and flag certain things, but action is never taken. Whereas if you listen, you're actually open to see what the feedback is, consult with the relevant stakeholders to see how you can take action. And to me, I think this is one of the most important steps a founder can take, because in my opinion, you should be involved in the community, whether it's you, the CEO, the CTO, the CEO, someone on someone at a decision maker level should be actively involved in the community, being able to understand what their perspective is and have the communication and listening skills to not crash out, but actually take into account what they say. And I think of something else, which is, I guess, diverting a bit more from like the people skills and more the soft skills. But I think for me, hard skills, which I find super critical in terms of just success, is obsession and confidence. For me, I think you need to really understand that you're going to have to put in 24 hours days sometimes, right? You're going to have to be there every single day, kind of pushing and being obsessive about your project. And if you're not fully committed and don't have the confidence in your vision, and that certain things on the timeline or certain things which are just said publicly in your community get to you, you're just not going to be able to execute on that vision with full clarity. And I think with that, something which I've seen work really well is decisions that are based on data, and actually taking that into account, right? Even if that's data that's through the form of just sentiment, I think there's a way which you can analyze that into be something that's which helps the founders and teams just make strategic decisions and able to pivot as necessary. Because I think if we look from a gaming landscape, a lot has changed in the last 12 months. And if they're not willing to be open-minded and experiment and take risks, I think it's pretty much a recipe for disaster before anything even kicks off.
I'm curious, how do you guys at AP Collective kind of identify or think about founder versus company brands? And in other words, one thing that I've kind of looked at over the last year or so is like, look like Kim Kardashian, where you have the IP that is the person or the founder, which are able to build these brands in parallel or different types of IP beneath the founder that then enables you to build these compounding businesses. But I'm curious, like, is that how you view founders? Like, do you think founders should become influencers? I think another good example here is Zuck's glow up. I think a great case study is looking at Meta's stock performance in view of the glow up of Zuck and how they recast him more as an influencer rather than the sterile kind of lizard man that other people saw him as. So just curious, the founder versus company brand kind of delineation, and whether you'd agree with that or you think we see something different in the market today.
Yeah, I definitely think it's probably the best marketing vertical which you have. It's almost like a wild card that you don't, as a founder, you don't always have to be forward facing. I would say, like, when you're in, for instance, like you're raising or in sort of pre-seed phase, I think you don't have to be as active. And if your community isn't at the stage where it kind of needs the nurturing and the voice, you can kind of take that more quiet role where you're focused 100% on your business and the company as well. And I would say for me, a founder for brand is all about authenticity and approachability. I think to me, the best founders have an established personal brand voice, one that feels human, relatable, and genuine, because people are not going to buy from a brand in Web3. They're just not going to buy from a brand in general, right? They need to be sold, they need to be persuaded, they need to be convinced, and people trust people. If you have an energy that, kind of leans into possibly sometimes trends, sometimes your product, sometimes culture, sometimes memes. You want to actually talk to people as a founder. You don't want to talk to no one, right? You don't want to just kind of talk your product into a wall with no one really listening, or have no interest in anything that it is what you're saying, because you want to build a community that's truly invested in you as a person and the success of you in what you're building, right? So I think kind of having the open line of communication where you can be the main point of contact for your community. You don't have to respond to every single ticket or every single message, but to people who make a difference within your community, you want to show that you're present. You want to show that you're listening to them. You don't want to come across as someone who's just shilling stuff to them, because again, that's kind of how you disrupt that human, relatable, and genuine connection. And then from my perspective, like at a bare minimum, founders should share their thoughts at least 3 to 5 times a week on Twitter or on Discord. I would say it's also okay to kind of be ever present in your Discord and kind of make announcements yourself in more private channels. If it's, for instance, even as simple as, your private sort of angel investors or your whales or just anyone that's kind of involved. But I think for me, at a bare minimum, they should be active on Twitter. I think if you can kind of aim for that 3 to 5 times a week post with kind of giving value without expecting anything in return. Because if you're a founder of a Web3 brand, which people believe in, you're probably someone who's quite knowledgeable, someone who's got either a successful past track record or being able to kind of prove themselves in present time, which in general, you're a thought leader. So you might as well show it and kind of take that and use that as a competitive edge over other founders who are not willing and don't have the courage and don't really kind of put the effort in, because I think it's probably one of the most crucial things. And I'd say you want to show that you're visible on the timeline as well. Like, you don't have to reply guy, GM everyone and kind of just be like very shallow. But if you can give, maybe 20, 30 meaningful replies throughout the week, or maybe more if you're pushing a certain product or campaign, I think that's something that's super important. And if you're able to kind of interact with your community and show that you're genuinely listening, it really helps to build that trust, which in turn allows you to kind of build that brand loyalty, and then over time allows you to build increased retention in your products, which is why I think founder-led brands within Web3 really have high retention rates when they're kind of going through the building stages. Whereas I think, on the other hand, brands which are less focused on this specific vertical, their product kind of becomes vaporware after the campaign, or even when the campaign is live, or the build-up phases. So yeah, those are some of my thoughts at the moment. And at APC, I think founder-forward brands are incredibly important, and almost like, if you're not willing to do this or adapt your day to kind of do this, it's a huge red flag.
I totally agree. I think, if you're not taking brand risk, you're going to die in crypto. And I think, it sounds like a couple of things that you said, maybe not as eloquently, but, you were talking about authenticity. You were talking about presence, right, on social media, in Discord, basically presence where the community lives. I'm curious how you reconcile this idea of authenticity and presence with kind of the recent emergence of AI, right? So in other words, these LLMs that are connected to Twitter, these AI influencers that are in essence kind of digital twins of maybe a founder forward kind of brand. So I'm curious whether you think AI can be leveraged as a tool productively within kind of the two contexts that you mentioned, such as presence, because AI can be omnipresent, right? And then also authenticity, where it feels like maybe the AI influencer is a little bit less authentic. I don't know, maybe you have a different opinion.
Yeah, I would say AI influencers definitely have their place, especially when it comes to scaling content and engagement, but they can't replace that personal connection. Like, it's something that's real. An AI agent, at least to my knowledge, as of now, cannot go DM its community members. It can't kind of understand who are the people that are showing up every single day across a number of different social media channels beyond just Twitter, like on Discord, on Telegram. Are they the same people showing up and really engaging? I've seen that they've been able to, support with things like, Twitter posts and kind of being able to increase the frequency of content. But in my opinion, they're a tool, not a substitute specifically for founders. I think AI influencers, to me, are really valuable when it comes to just building another sort of vertical of attention within crypto. But I think it can complement a founder's brand, but I think the human touch inevitably is irreplaceable, especially in Web3, where there's kind of like, being doxxed at a certain period of time. I think, in sort of that 2021, 2022 phase was kind of like a deal breaker for most investors or community members when it comes to having that trust and transparency is super important. But I think for me with AI influencers, I don't see it as a fad. I think it's something that's incredibly beneficial for the space. I think there's a lot of, no, with no better word, LARPs in the space anyways. And if some of them are replaced by AI, I don't think anyone will actually notice. And those who are able to use it to their advantage, I think that's also something which they can do anyways. So if LARPs want to LARP with AI, then that's something which I would let them do and LARP even more.
I totally agree there. Just one final thought, maybe before we toss the jacket for the next topic, but I think AI influencers might take on the role of like an intern, So in other words, if you have a big project, right, and then you have the founder's voice, and you have the voice of the intern who maybe is a little bit more of the degen, kind of recasting of what the founder's pushing, then you have the AI influencer, which creates this omnipresent sort of voice within the community that you can kind of push in different directions, which probably are not the authenticity direction, but are probably more the continuing to kind of beat the drum of managing the attention in the space. Like you were saying, showing that you're present. Yeah, I totally agree there. I think that's a good way to break it down.
Yeah, I think on that, I think it's a really interesting topic. So I think for me personally, when it comes, I think the intern is a meta that's reappeared. I think Litecoin has kind of come out of nowhere with their intern. I saw Polygon, OKX as well, kind of come up with new interns and kind of bringing a lot of spirit and sort of that human aspect in terms of, hey, this is something that's relatable, it's genuine, it's funny, it's something which is super entertaining. But something which I will tell you is like as a builder in the space who's working with a number of different projects at the same time. Good interns are gate kept like crazy. You'll not be able to hire a good intern. Like, where do you actually find one, right? Like, you can't really make them apply to a job to see how, on a scale of 1 to 10, retardio they are, right? Like, it's just not possible. And like, how chronically online can they physically be? There's no way to really test like how do you actually do that, and the ones which are actually good and kind of have some level of professionalism, you'll never be able to contact them. The brands you speak to will always hide their identity to the maximum which they can do because it's such a valuable aspect. But I do think you can probably train a language model to kind of be able to understand what is the scope of an intern, what is the way that they communicate. And over time, I would say you'll need a significant amount of machine learning and data to really have everything that's necessary to kind of communicate as an intern for a brand. But I think it's probably the most important role within crypto, full stop. And it's, in my opinion, the hardest role in crypto to hire by far, because how do you scout these people? How do you test their ability to stay chronically online for an extended period of time? And how do you make sure that they don't get you into trouble, but kind of manage that gray area as well? So yeah, if you're a waifu company or kind of leaning into that genre, I would definitely recommend kind of leaning into AI and see what you can kind of do. And I think, to me personally, like, this could be an experiment which I personally take on to just kind of see, like, is this a solution to the gap in market of intern persona or intern position, and then see if AI is able to kind of simplify the way in which it can be trained and onboarded to your average person.
Yeah. No, I think you raised some really good points there. And it's somewhat inevitable, right? I mean, getting the sufficient data and tailoring that data is one thing, but it's a solvable problem. And I think half of these AI agents are already like shit posting like some of the best interns out there. Well, switching gears a little bit, you guys are obviously focused on growth specific to Web3 markets. I'm curious, like, when you look at growth or UA from a Web2 perspective, it looks very different than everything that we've discussed so far. I think you could argue some genres. I think traditionally we've seen it a lot with MMOs, where you'll have founders like active in the Discord. Ashes of Creation comes to mind as one where you do kind of have that founder forward brand, but it's definitely not typical in the majority of other high performing IPs. So maybe I would be very interested in kind of hearing your thesis on what growth really means in Web3. So like, what are you, as you are training up, for example, these like founder forward brands and go to market strategies, to what goal is all of this? Like, what's the ultimate kind of, I guess, milestone that you're helping these teams work towards?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of layers to your question. And I think, to begin with, from like the user acquisition standpoint, I think we're, as you mentioned, very focused on like the Web3 or crypto marketing angle, and we kind of approach UA with a different mindset. we kind of believe that traditional models is what has incentivized so many builders to kind of approach Web3 gaming in terms of like they feel that UA within traditional gaming has become a lot more expensive. You really need high budgets and high expertise to kind of be able to capture broad audiences. Whereas in Web3, you kind of have this angle where you can focus on ultra targeted users. Like I think in a way that's never been seen before. Like you're able to really talk and engage with people who fully understand your product, which ultimately allows you to have higher lifetime value from these users because there's just their actual human connection, I would say, between the product and their ecosystem. So something which we feel is important is within Web3 with the right community driven strategies, customer acquisition costs will be lower because they're often incentivized to kind of onboard a few other people with completely different approach to Web 2, right? I would say in Web 3, attribution links, referral links are just something which don't work to the extent that they do within Web 2. Like, I think download links in Web 3 just are not as effective, whereas I think things like content marketing and just showcasing the product through things like live streams or just kind of audience showcasing through, I think, periods which aren't super saturated, like AMAs, where you can kind of talk about the product and kind of allow people to get something which captures their attention so that they can spread the word themselves, really reduces the reliance on traditional ad spend, where I think it can get incredibly difficult, where I would say they're just focused on balancing customer acquisition costs with retention, whereas with sort of that crypto audience, you're so targeted that you already have retention in mind. Although it's a much smaller pool of players, I think at the very most, if we're pushing it, is just a couple 100,000 wallets, not people, but just a couple 100,000 wallets. I would say over an extended period of time. And I think with that, what we like to do is one, the main North Star is always revenue. I would say that is the only metric within Web3 that cannot be faked. So, which is why in the Philippines, we're going to be hosting our first event, which is, I think, YGG, as you guys mentioned offline, is more of a consumer facing event than something that's targeted exclusively B2B or B2B2C. And I think for me specifically, the thing which I love most about Web3 is that the loyalty is incredibly high and you can really build that sort of cult community rather than that one time transaction, which I think is incredibly common within Web2. Like, hey, I play the game, I like the game, I maybe spend money once, okay, I'm bored, I move on to the next thing. Whereas within Web3 and kind of this community, especially with founder led brands, you can kind of keep the engagement ongoing and can kind of contribute to long-term growth and sustainability, because although there is restrictions within the total addressable market within Web3, I think games like Off the Grid and I think a few more over the next couple of months can kind of show that with the right combination of marketing, you can kind of capture both landscapes. And I think that's just something which will continue to grow over the next couple of months for sure.
Yeah, I think the brand loyalty angle, there's definitely a lot of truth there. Like, you make a small and early community ridiculously wealthy and they'll stick with you through thick and thin, and become brand advocates. How you get them there, I think, is a whole other subject. You mentioned Off the Grid, and disclaimer, both Delphi and Shima are investors, but I would love to hear your unfiltered thoughts on their approach to growth and go to market.
Yeah, I do have some thoughts, and I guess disclaimer as well. AP Collective have contributed to campaigns around Off the Grid in the past as well. I think the approach which they did take isn't actually too dissimilar to what we have spoken about, right? They've onboarded a number of different testers, made them sign NDAs for an extended period of time to kind of just build that grassroots community. And I think they did that for almost a year, I would say, or possibly around that sort of time frame, where they were able to get genuine feedback, get actual players involved within the crypto space, with kind of a curiosity for the actual product. And kind of really, I would say what they did was like kind of, since everything was under NDA, they just weren't allowed to talk about this publicly. But I think within certain circles and within certain communities, there was already an understanding that the game Off the Grid is incredible, and it's in that top 0.1% of Web3 games, and I think can even be classified outside of Web3 games. So I think with their global launch, I think they executed it in the way that every game should aim to do so. Obviously, not all of them will have the luxury of having budgets to that extent. Maybe not the team which is able to kind of manage the legal work or just kind of like the behind the scenes community building with that level of scale on the NDAs and on the Discord side of things as well, and probably not being in the position to ship as many games as the Gunzilla team have. So I think from my perspective, their global launch really has allowed them to kind of just show like we're bigger than Web3 gaming. We're just one of the biggest games. We're going to compete with Call of Duty. We're going to compete with PUBG. We're going to compete with Fortnite in terms of being some of the most watched games across Twitch in comparison to others like YouTube as well. And I think for me personally, like what they did from a Web3 aspect was quite well gate kept to some extent. Like they did a lot of what we have already discussed in stealth, and I think the average person probably wasn't aware. But I think there's certain reasons that Delphi and Shima and many others have been super bullish on Gunzilla and Off the Grid, and I would say that's because they've been able to kind of do a very impressive job on the crypto native side, more behind the scenes, more behind closed doors. When I think with their go to market, like is completely focused on players. That's just some of my thoughts around Off the Grid. One of my favorite games, and blessed to have been able to work with um, to create campaigns around the game in the past as well.
And so, switching lanes again, we are in a stage of the current market at the time of recording where a ton of games are going live or are already live and will soon have a token launching. That combined with like a ridiculous number of new L2s in gaming ecosystems without too much new entrance into the market, it's kind of got a lot of people curious as to like what the state of gaming token launches will be like over the next 3 to 6 months. One of the biggest like factors in having a successful launch is the token launch strategy, let's say, and specifically whether or not you can get listed on one of the major exchanges. Like traditionally, I mean, it's always changing, right? But one of the more notable metrics that I think everyone is aware of that these central exchanges look for is your typical vanity metrics, right? Like social following, the total number of registered users. Sometimes they'll go a layer deeper and look at actual engagement rates. Sometimes they won't. But yeah, I'm curious if in your line of work, because I'm sure that a ton of founders are kind of hiring you to help them best position for their token launch. What do you think are the most notable key metrics that you're kind of pushing for, and whether or not central exchanges are paying attention today is one thing, but yeah, which do you think have staying power?
Yeah, I think for me, the most important thing is to just look at it from the perspective of where you want to get to, which is, that actual exchange listing. And what is the most important thing to them, right? You want to look at it from their eyes and then try reverse engineer based on what campaign and product you're able to deliver in the timeline with the timelines which you do have. And the only things which exchanges care about is one, they want new users, they want to have growth. I think that's something that's very clear. They want to have depositing users because that allows them to generate fees. And to be honest, that's the only two things that they actually care about, right? They want more people to use their product, and they want to generate money from their product. So with that, I think what you want to be able to have is one, you want to be able to have users that are able to KYC, right? And I think when you look at it from Telegram Gaming, that's why so many different exchanges decided to run campaigns with these Telegram games, decided to list these Telegram games because there's an incredibly high number of unique transactions. There is an incredibly high number of users that the only way that they're able to claim their reward through Telegram games is if they KYC, so that they're able to kind of cash out their reward. So I think something that's super important is a number of unique transactions, the number of users and people and users which are willing to kind of take action and complete certain steps. For instance, KYC, right? That's what the exchanges are looking for, because from there they're able to generate revenue, right? And I think this is the second most important thing. Is one, launching a token is incredibly expensive, right? It's not a market like 2021 or 2022, or even to the start of this year, or end of last year, where launching a token means that the company launching the token will make money. It's not always the case anymore, right? Like, for them to make money, they need to have a successful token listing, and that's incredibly expensive. And the only way that you're going to be able to manage that is if you're having revenue from paying customers, because that's the same thing which exchanges want, right? They don't just want new users who don't do anything and are completely inactive. They want people who are willing to spend money, because exchanges are a business. They're probably one of the most I guess judged business within the space, because they're very commercial. They're very oriented around growth, and I think that's something which you need to be positioned for from a game, right? If you're And they also want to satisfy their community, right? If there's not enough volume, there's not enough traction on your token, because they feel there's not enough users that could potentially trade it, or there's not enough revenue which they can generate from them. It's not a risk for them to take, because there's a greater demand to list tokens than there is number of exchanges, right? One of the strongest current ingredients for a successful narrative in Web3 is price action. And I think price action is the only thing which can really define a successful token launch. And there's a few things which you need to kind of have to really get to that stage. Because if your community is losing money because they bought in and then they're not satisfied because the token's trending downwards, they won't be happy. If your community isn't satisfied with their pre-TG reward, again, they're not going to be concurrent users. They're not going to be retained users to any extent. So I think for me, a successful launch comes down to building a foundation of real engaged users who see the value in the project and will continue to talk about it and help to build a narrative. And that's what really creates staying power. And I think from there, you want to be able to kind of create an angle where these users feel value with like spending money. And I think that's probably the hardest vertical to succeed with. But I think, to me, to just kind of summarize, revenue, number of users are the two main things, because that's the only thing that exchanges want themselves, because they're selfish, they're businesses, they're commercial. So just look at it from their eyes. And if they don't believe that they're able to, if they believe they can get those two metrics or indicators from other people rather than your specific project, then that's something that they will look to prioritize instead.
Well, yeah, that I think that just about wraps it up for today's session. Abhi, it's been a pleasure, man. Honestly, you've been very transparent with us, which I think we both appreciate. Talking about everything from like founder-led brands to various key areas of Web3 growth. So yeah, man, really appreciate your time tonight.
No worries. It's been a pleasure to come on. It's been a bit of a headache to kind of get this arranged for both of you. Hopefully that the nodding and smile on your faces means is worth it to some extent, and you guys appreciate some of my unfiltered yaps, especially around AI agents. Yeah, those are some of my thoughts, and appreciate you guys inviting me on, and hope to come on again in the future.
Yeah, man. No, I think the AI intern was probably some of the best alpha from this episode. You heard it here first. The content of this video is intended for informational purposes only and should not be considered as investment advice. The views shared by Alex and I are our own, and we may hold investments in some of the companies or digital assets featured in the video.